If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonald. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my daily LinkedIn Live, where I teach processes, procedures, tips for success in the federal market. And since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret; it's just a process. Part of the process goes A to Z, right? And when you follow that process, you're going to achieve the results you're looking for, and you're going to get the outcome that you're looking for. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market, and I really have focused this training on what did I wish I knew back then in order to have even more success, right? And so for the last 5 years, I've really been honing that. And as we do these trainings, we're constantly trying to answer the how much more than the what. You know, what do I do? Well, you do this. That's easy for us to tell you what to do, but to teach you how. I feel like that's the stuff you really want, because you go away and you can practice that. You've got a new skill set, or you've got a new way of looking at an existing skill set, and you can practice on it. So that's pretty exciting. Before we get too far, do me a favor, help buyers, help other people in the chat, and most importantly, help me remember who you are. Put your company name, your core competency into the chat. 2 or 3 words is perfect. When you put that into the chat, we're able to track on that and see who's out there. By the way, as we go forward, if you are open to connections, let people know in the community, because I'm going to be teaching you, today's topic is on strategic growth, but I'm going to be teaching you today. But you have this community there that you can find other people to meet. I think for a while, I'm going to keep telling this one, feedback we got from somebody in the community talking about they have met hundreds of people and connected with hundreds of people since they've been part of our training this year. And that's really exciting for me, because I'm not part of those relationships. It's somebody coming in and meeting you, and you guys are able to go off and build a strategic relationship that might prove valuable for both your companies. And so definitely engage in there, be willing to connect. And if somebody's reaching out to you to connect, be friendly and connect with them as well. Last thing is, as I go forward, I'm going to be occasionally asking you to put stuff in the chat. Just let me know that you're hearing what I'm saying. If you do and it makes sense, do me a favor, put it in the chat. That way I can see that what I'm teaching is ringing true to your ears. Last thing is, I wanted to just say thank you to our supporting members who make all of this possible. If it wasn't for them, we couldn't do this training day after day, year after year, right? And we really appreciate you. So I just wanted to say thank you. Okay, making sure I'm all good to go. We're going to switch over and right into the meat of today's training. So today's topic obviously is how to have strategic growth in the federal market. And it's always fun for me when I put titles down to training events like this or sessions. How do I make sure I'm ringing true to what you think you're looking for? And so I'd love feedback after it. But one of the big things for me about strategic growth is making sure that you're working on the right things, right? And so it's not just about strategy. I've done other trainings where I talk about how to put a strategic plan in place, or a single page 5-year strategy plan. Today is really about some of the things you can do day to day to help you have that strategic growth. And that's what I'm going to be trying to teach you today. So let me know if it's ringing true with you. As I thought about why I want to do this training, or what you might be experiencing doing this training, one of the things that just comes to me, and it's because I actually was talking with somebody even earlier this week, is that we just feel overwhelmed, and you might feel this way as well, right? We're just overwhelmed with doing busy work. And sometimes that busy work is important busy work, but it's still just busy work. Like, I want to work on that, but I'm stuck working on this. We feel like we don't have the time, and maybe you feel like this as well, right? We don't have the time to work on the things that are, in our mind, important enough to help us grow strategically, right? So working on those strategic tasks or activities, relationships, et cetera. Or you might just feel overwhelmed, right? With all of these responsibilities sitting on your shoulders. I mentioned somebody earlier in the week, a customer I was working with, who we're working on this part of her business, but there was a little struggles. And then when we had a conversation a little bit further in the meeting, it turned out there was all these other things that were actually going on that were kind of combining to, put responsibility on the shoulders, right? We're talking today to salespeople. So whether you're a business owner or a business developer, but in this particular case, she owns the company, and all these different things that demanded her attention were on her shoulders and impacting this. And the problem was the stuff I'm working on her with is the strategic activity. And, so I was able to help her and say, hey, let me take that over, get it done, get it back to you. And you can at least have this one portion you don't have to worry about. But I feel like many of us sometimes get into that position where we have all this responsibility on our shoulders. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a business owner to be that loaded down. Sometimes just responding to your company as a business developer or a salesperson, you begin to feel a little out of order, right? And what I want to do is be able to help you get back in focus. How do you kind of gain a little bit more control or feel like you have a little bit more control of your day in a way that's leading to what you want to get done? And so my goal is strategic growth, right? In order to have strategic growth, I believe that you must focus your attention and your time on important things, but not urgent things, right? You're always going to be focusing on the crisis of the day, the urgent thing. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But in order for you to have strategic growth, you must put your attention towards those things that are important, but not urgent, right? And I'm going to share those tips on how we do that. Before we do, let me just talk about, actually, if you haven't seen me do this week, this week is this book back, as always, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. First time I signed it, when I read it, was 1997, before some of you were born, I think, which is fine with me. But in there, Stephen Covey talks about 7 habits for highly effective people. And some of the habits he's talking about are around time management. And I wanted to explain what he describes as the time management matrix. And an important differentiator to me is that today I'm talking about time management, not task management. Task management is a to-do list, right? You're putting it all down and you start looking at things and you're feeling off. Time management is looking at the amount of time you have in a day, a week, a month, a year, whatever, but managing that time according to your goals, according to what you want to get done. And so as we go forward, think of it that way, right? This is a time management matrix. This training today is about time management, not task management. And so Stephen Covey has this matrix, and I'm going to walk through it, but you can basically see it like this, right? The quad. And I'll explain those. Those are 4 quadrants in there in the time management matrix. The first quadrant, quadrant 1, is for tasks that are urgent and important, right? So it's important tasks and they're urgent. Things like this could be proposals in sales, right? It could be proposals, crisis of the day. Other people's fires is one of my least favorite quadrant 1 activities where it's important and it's urgent, but it's because of your poor planning or something. So that's quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 is for tasks that are important but not urgent. And so this is where the strategy world lives. This is where business development happens, because business development is never urgent. There's nothing urgent about business development because it's all about discovery. So doing true business development, that's quadrant 2 activity. Some capture activity. And what I mean by some is all of the capture activity you do where you're not in a rush. If you haven't done things when you should have and you're doing the book report at the last minute, or if somebody throws it on your plate at the last minute, well, then that capture activity goes to quadrant 1, right? Important and urgent. But for some tasks related to capture, it should be in quadrant 2. When I do capture activities, I'm trying to identify opportunities that are not dropping. The RFP is not coming out for 6 months, right? 12 months, 24 months. And then all that activity I do on capture, that's quadrant 2, because there's no urgency beyond it or behind it. It's just important and I want to get it done. So that's quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. They're both important, but quadrant 1 is urgent. Quadrant 2 is not urgent. Quadrant 2 is where we're going to live, and we'll come back to that. Quadrant 3 and quadrant 4, they're both not important, right? So the top level is important. These ones are not important. And quadrant 3 is not important and it's urgent, right? So you can think about meetings as just one quick example. I don't want to spend a lot of time in these 2 that are not important. Read the book, right? But in quadrant 3, where it's not important, but it's urgent. An example of that might be company meetings or team meetings. If you think about proposals or capture or something, where the way I like to look at it is if there's 4 or more people in a meeting, or there's a whole bunch of people in the invite, there's a really good chance that that's not an important meeting for me. It certainly is not, in my opinion, for me, but I would submit it's not for you either. You should look at any meeting that has 4+ people and go, why do I need to be there? Like, could this have been a memo? Could it have been a data call? And so those kind of things to me are not important and not urgent. And then the last quadrant 4 is not important and not urgent, right? And so there's all sorts of personal ways you can look at that. Like Netflix is not important and it's not urgent for most of us. But random phone calls, right? If you got a phone on your desk, you got a cell phone, random phone calls or texts, even from people you like, those sometimes are not important and not urgent. They're just touch and base. They're not even tracking on things. It could be random sales calls to your desk phone or something. Those are not important and not urgent. So you don't want to be spending time on any activity that's not important, right? I think we kind of agree to that, and we move up. I want to give you a quick little story about the vitalness, if that's a word, how important quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 are in relation to each other. For those of you who were tracking my training schedule, Tuesday I missed because I had to go to the dentist. I broke a tooth. And the reason I broke a tooth, so I broke my tooth and I had to go to the dentist, and that's quadrant 1. It was urgent and it was important. I was holding my hand like this. That made it important and urgent to me. And then the dentist got me in there fast, right? So that was important and urgent for me to get in there and take care of my tooth and get it fixed, which they did. They're great. The reason I had to go there, though, and the reason I had to spend time on quadrant 1 on Tuesday, and the reason I couldn't be with you and the reason I couldn't provide training like I wanted to, was because I did not spend time in quadrant 2 when I was a kid. When I was a kid, just, I come from a family of 10 kids, and brushing your teeth was not, it was like, go brush your teeth, and that was the end of it, right? So I had in particular horrible dental habits, which, they just have led to bad teeth going up, and you have to deal with it, blah, right? But if I had spent time in quadrant 2, I never would have gone to quadrant 1. And you can think of that with your business the same way. If you spend more time in quadrant 2 on things that are not urgent, but they are important, you will find that you'll spend less and less time in quadrants 1, 3, and 4. And that's how you're able to have strategic growth, by actually focusing on doing the right activities that will lead to the success. So if all of this made sense and the quadrants made sense, what I was talking about there, put time management into the chat. Let me know you're tracking on that. Time management. And by the way, as we go from that bullet to the next one, remember, go pick up a copy of 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. I have it on audio as well. I've listened to it every single year, at least once a year. I listen to it. It's a commitment to personal development and professional development. I guarantee you it will help you in whatever you're trying to do. It will help you. Okay, let me move on to the next little topic here that I want to talk about is just really quickly, I want to talk about the differences between working on your business and in your business. For those of us who've been around a long time, we hear folks say that you should be working on your business, not in your business. Typically, that's what we say to small business owners or business owners, right? Is work on your business, not in your business. Don't be a billable person on a contract. Be running and leading your business. But you can also think of this as a good phrase or maxim for business developers and capture people as well. Working on your job instead of in your job. An example is in is maybe more reactive, and on is more proactive. And so if you're working on your business, you're doing proactive activity. If you're a capture person in sales, for example, you're ahead of the curve. And I'm going to show you in a minute about the 7-step process, but you're in doing capture early on with a customer long before the RFP drops. Well, you're working on your job or on your business in a way because none of it is urgent. It's just important, but it's not urgent. When you're reactive, you're working in your business. And in this case, in the sales, right? You're dealing more with RFPs dropping or something like that. And so the tip to remember here is that strategic growth comes when you're working on your business, when you're working on a strategic look at what you need to get done, when you're working in quadrant 2. When you work in quadrant 1, you will not be strategically growing your business. You will just be reacting to all the fires that are in front of you. We want you to be working on your business, proactively growing your business, proactively following your strategic plan for growth. So if that makes sense, put be proactive in the chat. While you're doing that, I wanted to switch over because I'm just watching the time move pretty good. I want to move in and give you some examples of quadrant 2, right? We only got a few minutes in the training every day, but I can give you kind of specific examples in quadrant 2 that gets you started thinking about where am I spending most of my time, quadrant 1 or quadrant 2? I'm hoping you're not really spending a lot of time in quadrant 3 and 4, which is that not important quadrants. Okay, so I want to share this one screen here. Okay, so you should be able to see the 7-step process. I'm just going to show it for a second, and then I'm going to come back and talk to you about this. But inside of Federal Sales for Success, we talk about a 7-step process. And I say you have to do research in order to understand your customer and your agency. That'll then be able to help you determine the people you want to reach out to, targeting, and then begin to start reaching out to them, right? When you do that, you will build relationships, identify opportunities from those relationships, be able to write winning proposals and win sales. You can look at this 7-step process and go, where are quadrant 1 activities and where are quadrant 2 activities? And so let me give you an example just with proposals, right? And these, in the interest of time, I'll do these fairly quickly. But when you think about proposals, quadrant 1 activities are the RFP's dropped and I'm just in there. I'm just writing the proposal. We're all coming together. It's, this is where we're working on it. You could even put quadrant 1 in, hey, the RFP is dropping 15 days from now. The government gave our 15-day warning and the proposal is going to drop. You can be in quadrant 2 on proposals if you shift left in that life cycle. So if the RFP is dropping here and you back that up 15 days when the government might drop a notice saying the RFP is going to drop, and then from that 15 days, you back up further. Let's say you back up a couple of weeks, or you back up a couple of months. The farther back you go, when you begin starting to write your proposal, the more you're in quadrant 2. You were determining, for this opportunity that I'm going to write a proposal on, I'm going to start earlier. I'm going to start doing the outline. I'm going to start doing solutioning, right? This proposal activity is really just intertwined with capture activities. And so if you shift left, you're in a quadrant 2 world because it's not urgent. It's just important. It's important for us to write a good outline, to understand what do we know already about this opportunity, this customer, et cetera, and what don't we? Sometimes we get caught up in writing the proposal more or working more on it when the RFP drops. I personally believe that proposals that you're going after in your pipeline, not ones you're responding to at the last minute, like there's some contract vehicles, task order comes out and goes, you got 3 days or 5 days to respond and you never really even heard about it before. That's a different scenario. But for a lot of opportunities that are in our pipeline, we've got them in there 6, 12 months ahead of time. In the proposal phase, you can start writing earlier. When you do that, you're going to focus on quadrant 2. You're going to be in there thinking about that. The next part of the 7-step process is the pipeline, right? The opportunities. When you go into the opportunities, there's 2 main things to think about. If you're constantly reacting, and this is for salespeople in particular, I guess business owners, if you're in a role as a salesperson, but if you look at your pipeline and you start updating it because somebody is asking you, then you're in a reactive mode. You're living in quadrant 1, right? If all that you do is look at the opportunities when you have a meeting, a weekly meeting every couple of weeks or whatever, and you're looking at it and you're doing a pipeline review, if all you're doing is reacting and putting stuff in right before the meeting or right after, that's a completely reactive approach, not a strategic or proactive approach to growing your company and growing those opportunities so they can be winning opportunities, right? You're trying to shape opportunities during the capture phase. And so quadrant 1 is reacting to it at meetings, or somebody says, hey, what's going on? Quadrant 2 is when you start doing capture early on, right? You've got an opportunity in the pipeline. It's not coming out for 6, 12 months. And you go identify relationships. One specific example that you could do in capture that's solidly in quadrant 2 is finding out who the incumbent is. If the RFP is not dropping for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or whatever, and you say, hey, I'm going to go find out who the incumbent is, just one teeny task, part of capture. If you say, I'm going to go do that, well, if there's no urgency behind it, then you're in quadrant 2. You're thinking ahead. You can expand that to say, hey, I'm going to go in and talk with the customer, meet with the program office early on before the RFI maybe even drops, and say, hey, here's what we're thinking about solutioning. We know this need's coming down. This is how we think we're going to be responding to it. What do you think? In order to do those, though, you must have relationships in place, and that's the next step ahead. So relationships in here, proactively responding or developing in them and interacting means you're building strategic relationships. You've got recurring meetings that you and the other person are deciding to meet every 2 weeks. We're looking at these opportunities. We're talking about it. We're taking action items. That's a proactive quadrant 2 way of looking at and building relationships. A reactive or quadrant 1 way of managing your relationships, and they won't be strategic relationships, is waiting till something pops up and says, oh, let me call Jane, let me call John, right? Or Jane or John calls you and says, hey, we just saw this opportunity drop. Are you interested in joining us? And that's all last minute activities. It's all urgent. Now you and your company have to sacrifice all of your process to respond right away. But if you had been talking with John on a regular basis, you would have known John had looked at it 3, 4, 5 months ago and had already thought it was interesting for him, and it might have come up in the regular meetings. So when you look at relationships, you can take quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 and see the right activities that align to those quadrants, and you want to do more that are in quadrant 2. So the biggest, easiest way is to just have regular scheduled meetings, and those meetings will lead to a strong strategic relationship, which lead to opportunities, which lead to proposals, right? And so as you go back, you can keep doing this along the way, as I talk about quadrant 2, right? And so you want to shift left, and actually put that in the chat if you understand what I'm saying here about the federal revenue process. Success in federal government contracting is about shifting left. Put that in the chat. But every time you go earlier and get something done earlier, you're actually moving an urgent task to a non-urgent time frame, and that's a way you can kind of control it. And that's one of the last things I want to end up with is somebody asked me about how can I do more quadrant 2. You keep talking about how great quadrant 2 is, but I live in quadrant 1, right? So how can I go into quadrant 2 when my whole day is just packed with quadrant 1 activities? And so let me give you just a couple of examples that'll help you. They help me and they help people I coach. So one example about how do you get out of quadrant 1, right? The first thing is learn how to set other people's expectations. If it's urgent and it's important, it's almost always involving somebody else. If it was you, just you, then it would probably be part of your planning. But when you think about urgency, that tends to come from your boss, your teammate, maybe the prime is trying to do something, your customer, right? And so begin to set the expectations with people. If you've got a lot of stuff that is due every day, then you need to begin to set the expectations that, hey, I'm not doing it today. And in fact, never push it 1 day, push it 4 days or something. Just say, hey, do you mind if we reset expectations and I get this to you 4 days from now? When you do that, if it's so urgent, they'll say, no, I really need it. It's like, that's cool. But if you're talking about working with a prime who's got a data call and you reach out to the proposal manager and you say, hey, we're not gonna be able to get it done Tuesday. Can I get it done to you Monday, the following Monday? You know what, that's fine. I was a little ahead of schedule. So if you get it to me by Monday, it'll still be within my timeline, right? You're talking to that person, you're resetting their expectations. Now you have less in quadrant 1, you can put more stuff into quadrant 2. Second thing going with this suggestion is you want to understand capacity. When we do software development, especially agile software development, I used to do this a lot where you'd understand the capacity of the developers you had on the team. How much developing can you do? And depending on how much time they had, or we called it points, but depending on how much time they had available, then we would only fill in as much tasks on their plate as they could do based on the capacity they have. One of the challenges someone like you might be running into is that your capacity, you're running at 100% capacity. So if I ask you how much time do you have, you tell me 40 hours a week, and then I give you 40 hours of tasks. Well, now you're filled to capacity, right? You can't take another task on there. And so anything that happens in your day or in your week will throw off what you're trying to get done, make you feel overwhelmed and out of control. But also there's no room for quadrant 2. Compared to if I said, what capacity do you have on a 40-hour work week? You might look at this and go, well, you know what? Quadrant 2 is really important to me. So I'm going to work 1 hour a day, quadrant 2. So I have 35 hours of capacity, not 40 hours. And I go, okay, cool. 35 hours of capacity, and I throw it in. That's as if I'm the one putting tasks on your shoulders. But going back to the first bullet about you setting the expectations for other people, what you need to do is to let them know, look, I only have so much capacity to get this done. If you put more on your plate than you can get done, you're first off going to just overwhelm yourself and have a bad day, right? But also you'll let other people down. You don't want to do either one of those things. So if you reset expectations with them, that'll be fine. And part of the way of resetting expectations is you yourself truly understanding how much capacity you have and that you need to own your own time. I'm only going to work 35 hours on that, and I'm working 5 hours on quadrant 2. I'm going to work 5 hours on growing my business, things like that, right? So if you understand what I'm talking about there, put own your time into the chat. Let me know you're tracking on that. So we just went through pretty fast on some suggestions, and I want to leave you with a couple of tips that I talked about. But the first one is, if you have bought 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, do that. There's all sorts of books that just keep coming out these days, but there's some books that are fundamental to our professional success and our personal success. I actually use the 7 Habits Highly Effective People to keep making me perhaps a better person inside my home as well as inside my office, right? So that's one thing for sure. Take it as an action item and do that. The second thing is think about the quadrant and the way I talked about it, right? Quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4, and focus more of your time first on the important things, like get out of 3 and 4, right? And then try to get a good bulk of your time blocked for quadrant 2. I have a handout that describes the quadrants from a GovCon's perspective, and it's got some bullets in there, suggested activity that you could do. If you want to copy that handout, let me know. Put quadrant handout or Q handout into the chat, and we'll let you know where it's at and how you can get it. And then the last thing is, I just want you to remember, government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. Part of the process is taking control of your day and taking control of your time, being proactive. Proactive is a choice, right? Reactive is a not choice. It's a reaction. And so make the time to be proactive, right? And that's part of the process, is controlling your day, controlling your time. When you do that, you will start feeling a lot better about control over your day and getting done what you want to get done.